All right, folks, welcome to this amazing Sunday, January 15th, 2023. We're honored to be here to start our new podcast called Looking for the Light. As you can probably guess by my background, it's based on the new HBO show, The Last of Us. As our pilot episode, we'll be talking a lot more about predictions for the upcoming episode, as you'll see today on the premiere. If you're in the East Coast, you have the luxury of seeing this a lot earlier than us in the Pacific Coast. So really looking forward to your predictions out there as well. But to give you some premise, my name is Axel Hamill. I'll be your main host today for the podcast, and I'm joined here by Michael Abeloff, my co-host. And to give you all some background around the podcast itself, we're essentially creating a show that is an open forum to talk about predictions for upcoming episodes, factual things that happen within the episodes, how we're tying things into the actual game. So really, it's a podcast for an audience that has played the games by people that have played the games. Right, we're fans of the game, the series, the story. Big kudos to Neil Druckmann for being such a visionary in the story itself. And we're really going to look at a deep dive of artistic liberties within the show and visual elements of the show that correspond to some of the original concepts of the game, right? Because when you can tie things into like that, you can see some differences and similarities to the two, concepts of the story. Each episode will be recorded and displayed during the premiere of the show. We'll talk about off-the-cuff stuff regarding things like the storyline, some themes around those episodes, the character and the casts. More importantly, how accurately have we portrayed the cast in the show. And finally, we'd love to also open up as a forum for all of you folks watching this for any comments and suggestions that you have for us to bring up in these conversations. So again, really glad to put this into the world. Again, we're looking for the light in a lot of ways, not just a show, but also bringing this into the light of the folks watching. Whether you're a new fan or an existing fan, this is it. This is your moment to really shine. And we're excited to bring this forth to you all. So with that being said, that was my long-winded introduction to the podcast, which will probably be repetitive for every episode. I also want to bring this over to you, Mike. Please give an intro for yourself as well.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Axel. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Looking for the Light, our podcast talking about The Last of Us HBO series and how it ties in with the Naughty Dog original The Last of Us Part 1, and probably tapping in a little bit into Part 2, as my co-host had so eloquently described. The purpose of this podcast is very much so going to be tying in the elements of the game to the HBO series themselves. Now, we know that they've taken a lot of liberty within the show itself. Not everything is going to be one-for-one and in comparison to the game. And quite honestly, when you're creating an adaptation of a video game, there's a lot of inherent differences that have to come between the two when you are creating an adaptation to the big screen, so to speak. Things need to be changed differently. Not everything is going to be from the first or the third person perspective, depending on what kind of adaptations we're talking about. So there are going to be some nuances to the show that are obviously going to take small or massive steps away from the game itself. But this is really our opportunity to kind of bring into the fold, so to speak, what kind of differences they made, what similarities they have between the two, what elements of the show pay homage to the video game itself. Clearly, there's going to be quite a lot of them. We have Neil Druckmann, the original creator of the game, along with his team. Neil definitely is worthy of praise, but much of his staff that he had around him at Naughty Dog created this game in a collaborative effort. And then you have Craig Mazin, who is the executive producer and writer to the show, who worked directly with Neil in creating the HBO series. Big fan of the game. big fan of the story and the lore. So he definitely wanted to create this show, both to fill in the gaps, to pay homage, but to also, possibly take some creative liberties there to, who knows, to make it more realistic, to make it more believable, to make it more emotionally captivating, visually captivating as well. But we don't know yet. The TV show has not yet premiered yet. As us recording this episode, we are still, completely in the fog. It has not quite yet cleared for us. We don't know what exactly the show is going to portray. We obviously have our opinion, or not our opinions, but so more our hypotheses of what the show is going to, how the show is going to portray the characters from the game and the story overall. Obviously, myself and Axel are big fans of the video game. We've been very passionately keeping track of all the different media related to the game, what has been put out there, both officially and unofficially. We've also done our own deep dive into very similar podcasts and videos, much like our own, which we are creating right now about other people's hypotheses. And we're just very ambitious to make a contribution to the world of The Last of Us fandom, and bring further conversation, because, like Axel had mentioned, the best part about creating a podcast like this would be to have feedback from The Last of Us fans, adding to the lore itself and their own thoughts of as the episodes come out, or as the story continues to be told. Fortunately, and maybe also unfortunately, these episodes will be coming out 1 week at a time. We can't just go ahead and binge all 9 episodes all at once. So we'll have to be sitting and waiting, very patiently, attempting to wait for the next episodes to come. And in that time, myself and Axel will be bringing to all of y'all fans our own ideas, our impressions of the episodes that have come, and making our predictions for what's to come in the future. And with that, Axel, if you don't mind, I would like, just for the viewers watching right now or listening, to give a little bit of background about yourself and how The Last of Us fits into your own story, so to speak. More so, when did you play the games? What have you heard about the games? How you were exposed to the games? And maybe your own impression of the games. Because, as you had first mentioned, this is a podcast for Last of Us fans, by Last of Us fans. We are not novices coming into this story right now, which hopefully there will be many, many people watching the HBO series for the first time, getting exposed to The Last of Us. This is a podcast that is meant for people who have already been through the first and the second game, and we're just here to talk about what we think about this show. So with that, Axel, I'll shoot it over to you to talk a little bit about what The Last of Us has meant to you.
Well said, Mike. Thank you so much for your insight there as well. So, the glorious thing about The Last of Us is, unlike a lot of unrealistic sort of zombie-esque genre movies or survival movies or pieces of artwork, The Last of Us is actually somewhat realistic in a sense of its background and what it's aiming to achieve, which is, what if an actual virus, we call it the cordyceps virus, were to develop into our existing present world, right? And what does that post-apocalyptic world look like from that? And that's the interesting part about it is, I was pulled into the story of The Last of Us for the fact of two things, right? In the game itself, and for those who haven't played the game, it takes place over 4 or 5 different geographical locations. I believe it's Boston, Pittsburgh, Wyoming, Colorado, and then Salt Lake City, right? This is on part 1 of the story. Pittsburgh is actually my hometown. I went to middle school and high school there, and then college short after in Ohio. So I have a lot of, definitely, grew up there and have a lot of ties to that area. And turns out that Neil Druckmann himself, as director, studied at Carnegie Mellon University in Pittsburgh. So ironically,
which, if I'm not mistaken, was also the reason why he chose to put that or include Pittsburgh in the element, just because he had lived in Pittsburgh for a long period of time as well and wanted to factor that into that. Sorry to interrupt you. Keep going.
No, please do. I think that's an important point. And to piggyback off of that too, that's the interesting part about the story and the fact that there's actually some personal element to his development with that city, right? If you play the game, what you realize is that a large majority of that story actually takes place in Pittsburgh. Out of all the geographical
formative parts of the game, yeah.
Right. Out of all the geographical locations within the game, Pittsburgh is probably the most heavily defined in terms of the finite details because it takes place in the city itself, which is not easy to define, first of all. We're talking about a game that was developed in 2012, more or less, right? 2011 even. Technology from back then was vastly different from what it is now, right? We have Unreal Engine, to develop a multitude of different, maps and visual graphics that you couldn't do back then, and that's what makes this so interesting. Is that it's so finely detailed, and that's what really got me interested in that game. First of all, is seeing kind of the level of detail. And seeing that it's my hometown as a representation in the video game for once, right? And I think that's really, really cool. The second element of that, too, is that I actually knew about the cordyceps virus in school, nonetheless, right? And for all of us in the scientific field or have any understanding of what the cordyceps virus actually is, it's a fungus, right? But the fungus only exists within ants, right? Or bugs in general, right?
Insects,
right? So the fact that they took a virus that actually exists and created a concept around that's brilliant, right? I think that's brilliant. Instead of creating something incredibly fictional, they actually took a concept that's scientifically correct in a sense and just amplified that notion, right? So I thought that story was so interesting, and without sharing a lot of spoilers, the whole story about The Last of Us is it's a story of a spoiler-friendly environment, but yeah, it's a spoiler-friendly environment, and it's really about an anti-hero story, right? And I think it's truly a story about love and redemption and anti-heroism. I think that's what's going to come into light, right? As for the sake of our title, within the story of The Last of Us. So, Mike, that hopefully that answers your question. I'd love to hear from you as well, from your perspective. What really drew you into the story of The Last of Us as well.
Yeah, no, for sure. One thing that you also mentioned there right at the end, which I think is pretty important. I was just listening to an interview that Neil Druckmann gave the other day where he talked about where he felt like a big theme to the first game as well was what you would do for those who you love unconditionally. I think it was a pretty big theme that, in that first game as well, you could say in the second game too, where it was such a driving factor to everything that, every major plot point within the game and how it factored into it. And I think he had also mentioned in that interview where he said, as he grew older as an individual and had a family and children, it had a profound effect on him realizing, how that sort of love unconditionally, how much it can affect your decision making, particularly when your decision making is revolving around things that are not simple decisions, not easy decisions to make, and decisions that have the potential to have a compounding effect from that point onward, once that decision is made or once action is taken. I think that's a very, very important theme for the game, and I think no doubt it's going to be something that's going to be very profoundly developed on throughout the course of the show. For me, The Last of Us the game itself, and just the concept, goes back more than 10 years at this point in time. I've been a big fan. Well, I guess just to rewind it slightly, I think the first time I had heard about The Last of Us was around 2010, 2011, when it wasn't even a teaser trailer. It was, I believe, a concept trailer that they had released, that Naughty Dog had released, which didn't show any gameplay footage whatsoever. All it was I believe it was a minute-long trailer that had Troy Baker, who does the voice of Joel Miller, doing a voiceover of footage of actual riots and civil unrest that was a collection of, you could call it stock footage of historic events that were happening in the 21st century that depicted human revolt against, let's call it, against authority. And the voiceover of Troy Baker speaking not quite in Joel's voice and accent, but something very similar. Clearly, he was still kind of practicing what Joel was going to sound like back then, because this was very early on. Talking about the unrest and talking about what you would do for others. I remember being in high school and seeing that trailer and just being absolutely overtaken with this excitement as well as anticipation for what the heck Naughty Dog could be doing. Because at this point in time, I was a big fan of the Uncharted series, definitely a big fan of Naughty Dog, the studios, and knowing that they kind of take immersion as well as action and storytelling to the next level, something that we don't really see, definitely hadn't seen at that point in time within the video game medium. So around 2010, 2011, I want to say what I saw that first trailer. And then 2013, when the game dropped, I remember it was in the midst of July. I had just finished my first year of college. I was home. Remember, pre-ordered the game at GameStop, went to go pick it up. As soon as I remember, this was still when GameStop was giving you time slots because they were anticipating so many people were going to come to get the game.
The midnight releases, right?
Right, yeah. With all the midnight releases, right. I remember I couldn't go. My time slot was not to go to the midnight release. I had like a specific, I think it was like 1:30 or something like that. And bet your bottom dollar, I was in front of that GameStop at like noon or something like that to go pick up the game. On the day that it dropped, I was there. I picked it up. I remember very clearly getting in my car. This is circa 2013. Getting in my car, having this game in my hand, and taking a picture and going immediately to post it on Instagram. And I think my caption was, "I can't wait for the nightmares," or something like that. We'll have to pull up that Instagram post. But yeah, I was just absolutely excited and elated for it, not being aware as to where the game was going to go. You know, I think I knew that it was going to be something reminiscent of like an Uncharted game at that point in time. You know, some adventure, some excitement, a couple of good laughs, just totally unprepared for what the story was going to be about and what it was actually going to go into detail. I believe it was probably the next 48 hours or so. It was mostly gaming through the night, sleeping for a couple hours or something like that. Then waiting for, I think it was like my parents to go off to work or something like that, so they wouldn't get on my ass about playing a video game straight. This was still at a time when my parents definitely still were able to crack the whip on me. But yeah, I remember very clearly beating the first game and just being so overwhelmed with not being able to comprehend it fully. And I think I didn't comprehend the game fully for some time. I think I went in and played it a game, but it was definitely an emotional ending for me when I beat the game. And I say that too because, the big element of of Joel essentially becoming like an adoptive father towards for Ellie throughout the course of the game, and that beautiful medium that video games have, where you can literally take control of the character. Not so much where like the actions that you take, have any kind of impact on how the game is going to end or anything like that, but just that connection that you build with the characters, being able to control them, go step for step with them, and how video games have that opportunity for you to really play out, some of the more mundane things that we might see in a show or in a movie or something like that, become very interactive and significant sequences when you are playing a video game. That's something I think that's unique to video games that you can't really get through a show. So, by the end of the game, I was definitely very, very much so attached to the characters themselves, and just the way that the first video game ends, I was very much so taken aback, and it had me evaluating my personal relationships with those who I cared about, my philosophy, if you will, on life, the meaning of life, the meaning of survival, the meaning of continuing on and pushing forward, perseverance, survival, whether that be in an apocalyptic world, which we don't live in, thank goodness, or just in a average life as any of us do.
Right, and I think another thing that's you mentioned there, I kind of want to tag on to, is the fact that when playing the game, like you said, it's very rare to have a game that is somewhat cinematic in a sense that it's almost a mirror to like what you would see in a show or a movie to an extent, but even more so that for those who have played the game, and those who may think about playing the game, it really touches on kind of like a subconscious fear factor a little bit, right? You feel constantly as if the sense of survival is genuinely there, because not only are you worrying about survival in outside in the environment, but also in indoors, right? So when you think about visibility, right, you're talking about multiple buildings without electricity, right? Multiple buildings that are corroding and are essentially uninhabitable, right? And the environments that what we call the infected are into, right? So I think that's definitely the most interesting thing about the game, is that it really touches on a subconscious element of fear in a sense, right? So just wanted to point into that. I didn't mean to cut you off, but I think that really ties into what you're saying in terms of the level of gameplay there. So,
right. No, you're 1,000%. You, even though there's no chance that a clicker is going to come around a corner and bite you physically, you, the player, but your character, obviously, it very much so. They were able to, I think, really put you as the player into the game, to when you do have that connection to the characters themselves. It very much so puts you in a place where not only are you emotionally invested in their journey, in the resolve, in their bond with one another, you're rooting for Joel to give Ellie a break halfway through and like be nicer to her, as opposed to as cold as he is in the very beginning. You become more invested in their survival, and it makes those encounters with infected or with hostile humans that much more critical. So yeah, the game, to round back, the game itself was definitely profoundly impactful on me, and definitely made me kind of digest and think more clearly about my own personal ethos and philosophy. And I remained incredibly loyal to the game, as far as calling myself a diehard Last of Us fan. Played the first game at least at least 30 times. I want to say at least 30 times. And then obviously when the DLC Left Behind came out, downloaded that immediately, played that immediately. I was in my second year of college. I remember when that game dropped. I believe it was 2014 when the DLC came out. And then just always always was someone who loved hyping it up to other people. I mean, Axel and I had met when we were in college. I would definitely let him know quite well at some point in time in the years that we spent together in college, how what this game was about, how cool this game was, how fun it was to play, but also hinting at the fact of how deep this game is and how different this game is from just about any other game that came out. Fast forward 7 years to 2020, we're in the midst of a pandemic. Unbelievably excited when the game part 2 finally came out, and it was essentially a rinse and repeat all over again with the second game, as far as the different plot arcs that the second game has, that honestly took the first game's plot arcs and sent it to a whole nother dimension, as far as the new set of characters that we have. The change within the way that the story was being told and the theme of the story itself, which is something that Axel and I have talked about much, how Neil Druckmann had said that the first game, the theme is love, and the second game, the theme is hatred. And there's much that can be said in regards to the second game, and I'm sure that throughout the course of these podcasts, we'll definitely be hinting at the second game quite a bit, but obviously grounding ourselves very much so in the first game and how it relates to the show. And ultimately, focusing on how challenging it must be both for Neil, Craig, and the entire staff at HBO to bring this kind of story to fruition and create this depiction of a game in a format that has so many times just been absolutely, in my opinion, absolutely butchered by other studios, by other production companies. There's been a lot of talk about how it's so difficult to make a video game adaptation onto film or television and make it be worth a damn. It's something that is just not easy to accomplish. But from everything that we've been hearing and reading and being told, some of it could be bullshit. But at the same time, there's a lot of hype that this video game, or excuse me, this adaptation of this video game is the one that's going to break that curse. Whether or not from here on out, every single other adaptation that is ever made is going to be as good, we'll have to see about that. But ultimately, we're not here to talk about any of those. We're not here to talk about Assassin's Creed, Doom, or Sonic the Hedgehog. We're here to talk about The Last of Us and see how they do it. And Axel and I have talked about this quite a bit, but we're envisioning a set criteria for the things that we're really going to focus on in this podcast.
On those points, I wanted to add on to the fact that this is going to be focused on the first part. I think the other thing too is you mentioned a few elements that I want to add as background for the folks watching. In case it wasn't very clear for folks, Naughty Dog is a developer of The Last of Us, right? Naughty Dog is also, for folks that have played the original PlayStation and folks that have really grown up with the Xbox 360 and the original Xbox, are very familiar with these titles. But Crash Bandicoot is a big one from Naughty Dog. Uncharted, I'm sure you've seen a Tom Holland movie, recently came out, also another Naughty Dog movie, which is an interesting point as well, because when we think about this concept of Naughty Dog doing two things now that are video game adaptations, what would you consider Uncharted as? I want to hear this from the audience. After watching Uncharted, whether it's on Netflix or the movie theater, what are your thoughts on Uncharted? Because is this sort of Naughty Dog's way of proving that they can do this? Was this their test run? In my personal opinion, I'm overly excited for The Last of Us because I think this is a much better format to depict video games. It's through a show because there's just so many elements, so many details you gotta portray. It also gives you time to understand sort of the interest level for folks. But again, Uncharted was a good movie, great cast. But I'm sure I'd love to understand more about people's thought process there. In addition to, you mentioned a couple of names in there. Number one, Troy Baker was the voice of Joel within the show, right? And also the motion capture actor as well. Troy Baker will be making a depiction in the series, and we'll talk about that in a little bit.
Yeah.
But Troy Baker has a very interesting way of portraying Joel in the show, right? It's very rare to, even for voice actors of shows or cartoons or whatever you want to call them, it's very rare for a voice actor to get so deeply engaged in their acting. And Troy Baker is somewhat naturally talented in terms of his musical sense as well as the way he acts out as Joel, right? You can definitely sense the internal struggle in a lot of ways that he's going through as the anti-hero of the story. And also, through everything else that we'll find out about his story, Troy Baker is certainly the best casting choice for the original games, right? And I'll stand by that fact. So with that being said, in these first few episodes, up until the point where we can actually add into more categories and really dive deeper into the elements, in our pilot episode today, we're going to be focusing on three primary categories. Number one, we're going to look at the actors, the chosen actors for the show, and their portrayal of the characters, right? Number two, we're going to look at the world itself. How is the world different from the world that's portrayed within the game, right? Are there a lot of similarities, differences, for the better, for the worse? That's an open forum. And last but not least, we're going to look at the homage to the games, right? So how true are we staying to the game from a plot standpoint, from the details? Already there's some things that are slightly different, but could actually have very strong impacts into the story. For example, the whole concept of airborne infections. As you've seen some of the rumors around, is that actually is no longer the case. It's likely going to be a physical contact. So that's actually a pretty significant change when you think about it. As if for the players of the game, there's several levels, several settings that take place inside buildings that have ways of essentially trapping folks in there if you're not properly protected from them, right? Which is like right, gas masks, for example, right? So I want to start the conversation over, Mike, with the first category when it comes to actors. So we know that Pedro Pascal and Bella Ramsey from the Game of Thrones have been casted as the main characters. Right. Ironically, and maybe people might argue with me on this, but the original cast of The Last of Us was, I would say, for the most part, fairly whitewashed. And I'm glad that they went with a little bit of a mix. Pedro Pascal being of Latin origin, as well as Sarah. Sarah is casted by Nico Parker. Sarah is the daughter of Joel from the games. And I think it's very interesting that they went through sort of a Latin American route there, giving us some more diversity for the story. We'll have to see it. And there's also incredible folks in the cast as well, like Lamar Johnson, Nick Offerman,
Gabriel Luna.
As well. Exactly. Right. There's certainly a heavy mix of talented people here, and from the reviews so far, I think they've been great choices. I think what I'm most interested in honing in on is the fact that they're calling some of the acting a little bit too gamey, if that makes sense. There's a finite detail between acting in a series setting and also versus a game setting where you have more patience. You actually have to patiently wait for certain things to happen versus a show which is fixed in a sense, like you already know what's going to happen, how to approach those settings. So maybe that is something to look out for as for the viewership. But again, I think Pedro is an incredibly talented actor, and so is Bella. And I think being an HBO show, it just makes logical sense that they took two actors that were strongly suited from another critically acclaimed show, which was Game of Thrones, and then placed him into lead roles. What I'm strongly interested in is also the portrayal of Ellie, because Ellie traditionally, will go through evolutions throughout the series, both part 1 and part 2, and I would love to see how Bella Ramsey's portrayal of Ellie will evolve over time as well. So I'm going to stop there. Those are my opinions. Mike, what do you have to share with us?
Some very good points that you drew there, and we'll definitely cut into each of those three categories just to kind of set the scene for ourselves and maybe what some of the viewers can expect from us in these episodes moving forward, as far as how the critique is going to come back from that. One big thing that we can knock out right away with the portrayal of the characters, and you had definitely talked about it with Troy Baker. And how he portrayed Joel, and now we're going to have that comparison of how Pedro Pascal portrays Joel in this series. It's one big thing that I think really needs to be emphasized is the fact that even though Joel is a very important character throughout the game, throughout the series, he's very integral in a lot of ways. The real showrunner for the game is the character of Ellie. Ellie, again, we are going to be a spoiler-friendly environment here. Ellie is the most important character in the first game. She is arguably the most important character in the second game. So if Joel is portrayed very, very well and believable, in a believable way, excuse me, by Pedro Pascal, honestly, a lot of weight sits on the shoulders of Bella Ramsey's portrayal of Ellie, because her involvement for the series from this point onward, even looking after season 1 of The Last of Us, it's going to be very, 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 very integral to, I think, the success of the show. She's also going to be using following with it, or, walking in the shoes of Ashley Johnson, who is the actress who did the voice acting and mocap for Ellie in the game in both part 1 and part 2. You had also mentioned that Troy Baker is going to be playing a role within the TV series. Ashley Johnson is also going to be playing a role within the TV series as well. I believe there's a theory that Troy Baker is going to be portraying James, who is kind of David's confidant, or one of his lieutenants, if you will, who's potentially could be an important character in the series. Not all that important, honestly, in the video game itself, but we'll see where they go with it. Again, creative liberty, they could make him a lot more important in the show than he was in the game. Ashley Johnson, on the other hand, is portraying Anna, who is Ellie's mom, which, aside from a letter that Ellie has from her mom as a collectible, there is no other direct portrayal, if you will, no direct portrayal whatsoever of Anna. She has only been talked about a number of times by Marlene, and we only have that note to hold on to. So we really don't know what she's been through, who she is, what kind of person she is, what that whole backstory is. And the fact that we already know that we're going to get a little bit more backstory into Anna is phenomenal. And that's something that I was very, very hopeful for with this show, that they are going to fill some gaps and also take a step back and tell us a little bit as well about the backstory. Hopefully they give us a little bit more on the cordyceps virus. Hopefully they give us a little bit more about Joel, about Tommy, about Ellie, about Anna, about Marlene, about everybody, frankly. And we'll hopefully learn a lot more about this world, because I think the portrayal of this world in the show may have some effect to the game itself, and by the game itself I mean part 3 that hopefully is in development right now. But I hope that it will be something that at least what they couldn't tell us in the video games, they will be able to tell us in the show itself. So you had talked about the characters and how the actors are going to portray the characters as well. It's going to be very important to see how they play them. Obviously, Pedro Pascal and Bella Ramsey, their portrayal of the two characters, that will be the most important thing. Nick Offerman, Gabriel Luna, all the other actors, and their portrayal of the characters. Obviously, it will be very important that they obviously have a wonderful performance to make the show more rounded and more loyal, I think, to portraying the story well. But honestly, at the end of the day, it's all on the shoulders of Bella Ramsey and Pedro Pascal. And going off of what I was saying earlier, it's very, very much so on the shoulders of Bella Ramsey, not just because, spoiler alert, she's going to be here throughout all of the games. Definitely part 1 and part 2. Hopefully we're going to see plenty of her in part 3 and if a part 4, if ever, is going to be created there as well. But it's very much so going to sit on her shoulders. The other characters, I think the other actors and their portrayal of those characters, that's just very much so going to play into the believability of this story and how they deliver those portrayals.
From my perspective, I think you touched on all 3 categories, right? And you did it pretty well. So I think one interesting notion is that, and I'm sure a lot of folks that are fans of the games and the show that's upcoming, is that they understand there are going to be a lot of elements here that what Neil said, quote unquote, are things that he wanted to include in the show but he couldn't. So I think it's very important for us to really absorb the additional information that is being displayed. Like the story between Bill and Frank is going to be really integral to understand the backstories. Again, a lot of the elements that we saw initially in the game were just collectibles, right? We had no idea who these people were, how they lived their lives, how they really tied into, and I think this is the interesting theme about the game that really expands on the original theme of love, right? Let's take, for example, Anna and Ellie, right? Why Anna thought Ellie was so special was something that probably gave Ellie a reason to really fight for, right? And that's something that Joel even went for as well, right? Meeting Ellie. And then you have the story of Bill and Frank as well, which will likely be expanded on as well. And it's, how these two folks lived in a town together for so many years. And as Bill says, another quote unquote is, it's not easy to find a partner in life, right? And I think that's kind of the interesting dynamic here that we have with all the characters, is that really it's an intricate system of the same theme, but in a deeper level with each character. And the character development here is going to be, I think, certainly something Neil has thought of time and time again, right, with developing 2 of these games. So, very, very interested to see how everything develops. And again, this is how the world is going to be shaped a little bit differently. I don't think we need to necessarily expand too much on the characters, as we are talking, having an initial conversation around all this. But when it comes to the world itself, so far visually appealing, it's one of the, I think I remember you saying this, it's one of the most highly budgeted series in recent years, right? So naturally, great cast, and naturally I'm going to assume that they have a great combination of aesthetic effects and post-production effects, right? So you have, your normal sort of physical effects, and then you have your CGI effects, right, that are in a combination there. So I'm hoping that there'll be a great combination of that. And I hope it doesn't turn into another Walking Dead, right, where we have a number of volunteers that come on board. It's like recycling the same sort of element and plot story, which is invasion, attack, invasion, attack, invasion, attack. Yeah, I think that's why The Last of Us is so unique, is that it's a hard and fixed story. It's not repetitive, right? And that's, I think, the years of development between the games is a testament to like how much they care about actually developing a story instead of looking at viewership, right? Like that's in all honesty a lot of the downfall of other series like that. So I think that's the interesting part about the world here and the story. And again, from what we've seen is that over the course of 9 episodes, which I want to hear from the fans as well for feedback. Is 9 episodes that are hour long like realistically enough to cover the story? Question mark. I don't know. We'll see. But within those 9 episodes, we'll from what we can tell see a lot of elements we haven't seen in the game so far. So, is the world believable? 100%, I believe so. There's some elements that might not be, like the way folks have their appearance after a post-apocalyptic world, right? Are we seeing a world where, we're actually shaped up to be in a disaster mode? Or are we going to be cleanly shaven and washed and looking all fine? That's the whole element we don't really know about, right? So, and how are the buildings going to be shaped up? I mean, we know this was filmed in Alberta for the most part. So how well did they actually get the finite details in? There's a lot of question marks we won't know until we actually see the show itself. But I think this is the forum for feedback, folks. Really would love to hear from you all as well what you expect. But Mike, those are really my opinions around those 2 remaining categories. So.
Yeah, very good points there, Axel. I want to, homage. I think, just to speak on the topic of homage, it's not like, I think if the show does not stick fully to the game itself, not scene for scene, cut for cut, setting for setting. Like if it takes some liberties there, I think it's very safe to assume that they are going to take some liberties there, and we can't hold that against them. But I think there's definitely going to be some pretty critical scenes where it's gonna feel weird if they don't do it the same. Tessa's death. Henry and Sam's death. I think, obviously even how the game ends with Joel's tirade through St. Mary's Hospital in Salt Lake City, and then the finale itself, like the conversation that Ellie and Joel have on the outskirts of Jackson. It's going to be really, really difficult for fans to have to swallow that pill if they do it very, very differently. It will be difficult for me if they're able to do it in a way where they still pay homage to it and it's still able to give that effect, that initial gut punch that I think a lot of people got from the finale of the game. Then all we will do is we will sit there and we will applaud Craig Mazin and Neil Druckmann for being able to pull that off. But if they do it significantly different and there's a massive plot point that is just glossed over or missed, that's going to be tough, man. That's going to be tough, especially for me. That's going to be tough for me to stick with it. Maybe for fans that are watching the show for the first time and haven't really played the game, maybe for them it's going to be like, cool, like, oh, it's different in the game. Well, I don't like the way they're probably going to do it in the game because this is way better. This is my first impression. Flip side of that maybe that's the exact same effect for us as well. We've seen how it's done in the game, and we want it to be done exactly the same in the show. And maybe that's just one of those pills that we've got to swallow, and we've got to accept that they might do it differently. But hey, we don't know quite yet. So when it comes to the homage category, so to speak, it's more so just going to be where do they get it the same, and where do they go a little bit differently, but do they still pay homage in some other respects? As well as, I would also note that, like, for me personally, having certain elements within the game that are within the show, rather, that are paying homage to the game as far as outfits, equipments, some of the script itself, some of the lines in the show, the delivery of them, even setting. We've seen a lot of things within the trailers that have come out for the show that are almost one for one as they were in the game, paying homage in that respect. If they have significant elements like that, that'll be very, very cool. To have, for them to be able to have those kind of homages and still be able to pull them off. So that's something that I'm definitely very hopeful for, and I'm sure that we will go into further detail and digest that even more as the episodes come out. But to talk on the topic of the world, that is honestly going to be something that I do want to emphasize quite a bit, real quick, just because. I believe it was said by one of my favorite YouTube channels, Girlfriend Reviews, when they had they were invited to the premiere of the first episode of the show just a couple of days ago. They just released their review of it yesterday, and I was able to watch. They brought up a very good point that the world in The Last of Us is a character in and of itself. Which I think is absolutely spot on. The way that the world is portrayed, if the world is not believable, if the world is significantly different, if the world is just not immersive whatsoever, if the CGI is clear as day, if it just looks fake, if it doesn't look believable, exactly what you had said, if you've got an actor or actress that is clean, does not look disheveled, does not look like they haven't showered in months, but they're wearing dirty clothes or something like that, it's just not gonna feel legit. And I really hope that they stay up to it with that. The next thing too, and it's we'll say it's part of the world category as well, but the element of the virus itself, there's been rumors that I believe Neil Druckmann has even come out flat out and said that the virus or the fungus is going to be different in the sense that it's not going to be an airborne virus, if you will. It's going to be, I believe, only transmission through physical contact. That is going to be definitely very interesting. I don't hate it. I don't know if I can love it quite yet. That's a pretty significant change. You had mentioned it perfectly. There are, in the game, there are settings which are infested with the fungus, and it is airborne, and you would not be able to survive unless you have the appropriate equipment to get through it, like a gas mask, for example. The fact that they're pulling that element out of it, I'm very, very curious why they did it. Maybe they did it because it's more realistic to what the real-life cordyceps virus is. I don't believe so. I do believe that the cordyceps virus is an airborne virus. So I'm just definitely very curious to see how it is. I will also double down and say, from what we've seen in the trailers, it seems as though they are going to go a little bit further in detail and give more backstory to the cordyceps virus. That, for me, is just like, chef's kiss if they can pull it off and do it well, because I think a big thing to this genre, like post-apocalyptic zombie genre, if you want to call it that, is if they make the world, if they have a very good explanation for the world that makes it very believable. I understand totally when there are certain books and films or TV shows, whatever, where they like to call it the catastrophic event, somewhat in the gray, and let the audience kind of develop their own explanation for why the setting, the world is the way that it is. For example, the book and film The Road, starring Viggo Mortensen, they gave somewhat of a background into what this natural disaster was, natural catastrophe that set up the world to be what it is within that story. But I feel like with The Last of Us, just at least by the way that the trailers are hinting, I feel like there might be a bit more of an explanation to it. And I feel like I'm also going to throw out this hypothesis based off of some of the trailer footage that I have seen. I feel like there's going to be a significant backstory as far as maybe where these origins are first coming from, because there is a couple frames within one of the recent trailers that I had seen that shows certain individuals sitting around almost what looks like a talk show and discussing funguses. And based off of their outfits, it also sets it maybe about 40, 50 years in the past that looked almost like a 70s, 80s vibe to the way that they were dressed. So I'm very, very curious to see how they delve into it further. I'm also going to be very curious to see if someone can please, for the love of God, explain to me, if this is not an airborne virus, then why is Nick Offerman's character Bill wearing a gas mask in some of the trailers? If a gas mask is no longer necessary because this is not an airborne virus, why is Bill wearing a gas mask? Granted, Bill's character, Nick Offerman in this case, Bill is a very OCD, very cautious, over worrisome survivalist. So maybe the gas mask is just an added precaution for his potential hypotheses as far as what the virus might be. So I'm definitely very curious to that, but I was going on the impression that there is going to be a airborne element to the fungus, to the virus rather, and the fact that they're telling me that there's not going to be one now. But Nick Offerman's character is still wearing gas mask. I don't recall if there were other characters or individuals in the trailers that were wearing gas masks, so that almost leans to the point where, maybe it's not. It's not airborne in the show, but the Nick Offerman wearing a gas mask in the trailer, I don't know. I've definitely got some questions, but hey, I'm here for the ride. I'm very excited to see how they're able to portray it. But man, if they're able to pull off the world well, then that'll just be a perfect bow onto this present that we're all being given on January 15th.
Right on. Thanks, Mike. That couldn't agree with you more. I think there's a lot of question marks out there. I think a lot of things to be excited about. I know we're almost at time here, so I wanted to end this off in a very good note. With this is going to be our new expectation for every episode. We're going to be doing a final grade based on our conversations for every episode within this last minute here. And I don't have a physical drum, but I'm going to do a little drum roll here as give us both our grades.
Add the sound clip right now.
And we are going to predict this first episode with a 93 to 95% A.
I like it. I agree. Just based off of what I have heard, no spoilers. I'm trying to be as loyal to myself, to my own heartache. If I have to listen to any spoilers, I'm going to do my best to avoid them. But yeah, it sounds like this is going to be a phenomenal first episode. It's 88 minutes long. Hell yeah. So ready to, dive into it for 88 minutes and then, probably several hours after, because I am going to probably hit repeat right away after that episode is over. But yeah, no, I'm definitely very amped for this first episode. We'll be giving our grades for the episodes as they come out. But yeah, no, this is going to be pretty huge, and I just really hope that the hype isn't all for nothing. I hope these aren't shills that are being paid off to say nice things in order to promote the show. This is gonna suck. Fingers crossed, knock on wood, don't believe that's gonna be the case. But hey, we'll just have to wait and see how it goes. But let alone, I'm very excited for this first episode, and we'll just have to see how it goes. But I'm very excited to be looking for the light. With Joel and Ellie and with my good friend and co-host Axel Hamill.
And on that note, folks, thanks so much for joining in to the Looking for the Light podcast. Follow us on Spotify. You'll find this link in description of YouTube as well. We'll be sharing this on TikTok, Instagram, You'll find Michael under at Man of Babrusk and me at Axel Hendrick on Instagram. Feel free to follow us, subscribe, like, comment for your feedback, and we will see you after the first episode. Looking for the light, folks. Take care now.